everybody, Gurmy's Coaster Yard here with another episode of Germanator Studios. And in this episode, we are getting quite a bit done, starting with finishing off our castle. And the first thing I did here was put the wall corner pieces in here just to add a little bit more depth to the build and sort of highlight the edges, I guess, just to make things look a little more solidified. So I just went around all of the edges and did that. Nothing too crazy. I started to do it where the little train station is, but I realized I couldn't put a corner piece there on the end. Otherwise, the train would go through a wall. So I left it out there. But in every other spot, you can see I put that in there. And here I'm just bringing it up to the top. Pretty straightforward. And I can't keep rambling on about this. I underestimated the length of the time lapse, I think. So hopefully I finish up soon. But I guess I can get started with the next thing I do, which is just putting more windows in around the place. I think I could probably stand to put some more in, but as it stands, I put them in on that main structure, the one where we sort of made it get smaller as it went towards the top. For the forced perspective look. And I just picked some different spots to put windows in, and I think it turned out pretty nicely. You can see I sort of alternated the position of the windows, so on one side there was two windows, and on the other sides, on the perpendicular sides, there are just one set of windows. And you can see here I am changing the roof. So inspired by some of the castles in Germany, I decided to sort of use an actual slanted roof as opposed to a flat roof, at least for this part of the structure, and I think it turned out pretty nicely. I went with sort of a copper color, and I think it sort of matched that earthy color. That looks good. And I also put two spires, I believe. Yes, two of the little spire roofs on our little eating area, and I think it works really nicely, and it adds to the character of the build. And it breaks it up. It's not so monotonous anymore. And here I was experimenting with putting trees in along the base. At first I was putting them on every tile, but I wanted to make it a little more sparse as it got further up. So eventually I will remove half of them, every other tree, and then I put medium-sized trees. Sorry, I experimented with medium-sized trees on the second row, but it looks like I ended up going with the small trees. And that was to continue the forced perspective illusion. So towards the top of the hill, the trees are a bit smaller, and then towards the bottom, I will make the trees larger. I don't really know if this illusion translates very well just because of the size of the build and the size of the castle, but I didn't want super tall trees right up against the castle because I didn't want them to block the architecture from the view of guests around the amusement park, or the theme park, I should say. And then along the bottom, I placed the trees on every row just to make it look like the trees were getting thicker at the base of the tower. And this worked out pretty well, if you ask me. And I think we're just about done with that. And then eventually I'll go in and put some bushes. So I didn't like all the bare space between those trees. So after I painted the hillside to have the little flowers on it, just to add a little more texture since it's a very visible part of the terrain. And then here in a moment, I used small green bushes on the middle row because those are larger than the small yellow bushes. So again, going with that, something that's larger at the base and then smaller at the top. So here you can see along the top row, I'm putting the small yellow bushes. They're a little smaller, but they're really, for the most part, the same color as the green bushes. It's not actually yellow, more of a yellow-green, but not that it matters. And that was just to fill in the empty space with something that didn't stand out too much, just to fill in the space. And then here with this extra space, I put more greenery in and some more trees and bushes. Actually, yeah, trees and bushes, just because we didn't need that extra area of stone. And if we put firework launchers in around the area, maybe I'll put some in that spot and make it stone again. But for now, we're just gonna leave it like that. And here we are getting on started on the train station. Now, a lot of the train stations, I mean, train stations in and of themselves are kind of a modern thing within the past few hundred years. So I mean, trains didn't exist in medieval times, so I wasn't super worried about making the train station look completely medieval. I more or less just wanted it to look like a classic train station, and there's not really a right or wrong way to do that. Um, but I just went with a stone building with some glass windows, and the train station is not meant to stand out either. Um, it's more or less just there to serve as a cover and for the train when it's parked. Nothing too crazy, as you can see. So but if you're worried about me breaking from the medieval look, uh, this should be the least of your worries because you'll see what we do in a little bit. Also, the title of this video, but I don't want to spoil it too soon. I'll explain it when we get to it. Uh, this is not the most modern looking building we construct. That's all I'm going to say. And then along here, I'm just putting in a base with the bricks, um, just to add something like a foundation sort of to the building so it doesn't just go straight into the ground. It adds a little bit of texture and depth to it. And then I'm going along with those bricks here in a moment. Okay, maybe not right now. What I'm doing is I'm matching the facade. So the 1/3 height walls on the facade match the texture of the windows and those bricks. And then the ones where I use the colored wall set block walls, those are going to be 1/3 height block walls, just to add some consistency on each face of the building. And finally, along here, I'm replacing the queue line, um, the handrails with the bricks, just to add consistency along there. And I just changed the color to sort of a red stone, like a clay color, to match the color of the bricks. Um, so this whole build, I mean, really, it's kind of, I don't want to say monochromatic, but it's got two main colors, which I may adjust, but at the same time, like I said, I don't want this to be like a standout building. This is more of a function over form kind of building. To, but it looks as nice as it needs to since it's in guest view. And with that, we are moving on. So this one, I'm pretty proud of this design. I came up with it in the last park, Rollercoaster Tycoon park I worked on, but this is my design for a half timber building or half timber house. And that's sort of like the most stereotypical like German architecture or just European architecture. So I start with the castle wall base pieces and then go into the western scene or the western wall set and use the porch pieces as a ceiling to that. And then along here, I go through with the colored walls and the colored slate walls, I should say. And right now, I'm just building up the walls themselves. I didn't want to focus too much on the windows yet. I usually decide that after the fact. Um, but for now, build up the walls, and eventually, here you can see where so the roofs associated, or the roofs of that wall set are only 2/3 height, so I had to shrink the edges by 2/3, as you can see me do there. And then here I just put in some windows, but these will get switched eventually because I'm putting in the wall girder piece on the outside edge of the building to sort of look like that wooden framework, and then I use the scaffolding piece on the top layer. So I think, especially here in America, when you see half timber style architecture, it really um, it's really like you see the grid of the wood structure and then the diagonals, which honestly I think it's kind of disgraceful or distasteful, whatever word you want to use, to European architecture. Because if you go to Germany or anywhere like that, I mean, it's as much artistic as it is architectural. There's so much intricate detail and much more than you could ever do in Roller Coaster Tycoon. But my reason for bringing that up is half timber architecture is not just about the diagonals and about seeing the frame of the building. It's really about the patterns you can create, which is why I use the scaffolding pieces as well as the girder pieces. And you even saw just there, you may have noticed for a 1/3 height section, I used the porch railing piece from the Western Wall set. So that's about everything I have to say about that. We'll build one more of those attached to this sort of barn that I'm building. Um, and that's basically what this is. I might make this into like a little winery type uh, attraction or restaurant. I'm not sure yet. Um, but for now, it's just something to break up the architecture and to not make this look um, completely like just one set of buildings or one building that's repeated around here. Um, but on that note, we are kind of going to do the same thing over here attached to this building. Instead of doing a 2-story building, though, this one is only going to be 1 story. And when I say 1 story, I mean the foundation plus the main floor on top of that foundation. But you can see we're going through with that same technique here. And putting in the 2/3 height walls on either end. And then here's where I'm putting the windows in. Again, pretty straightforward. And you'll notice that I use the single windows behind the girder pieces, and behind the porch pieces I use the double windows. That's just to add variety to it, but also the single windows are a little too tall for the girder pieces, and the the scaffolding pieces, and the scaffolding pieces, the railing sort of comes up above the window, which I don't care for, but it works better with the double windows. And you can see one characteristic of like villages in Germany is that the buildings are all very close together, and they can be kind of tall. I mean, 2 to 3 stories tall. Um, so when you're standing in them, they can feel overshadowing, and the streets can feel relatively narrow in that respect. And the streets, compared to American streets, are pretty narrow too. It definitely does not feel as wide open when you're in one of those villages. So I wanted to sort of exemplify that. And here, um, we're getting started on the most modern thing we'll build, and this is not only inspired by something I saw in Germany, but this is a recreation of a place I visited. This is more of an inside joke than anything. But when I was in Heidelberg, Germany, we spent 3 days there with fellow classmates, and we found this restaurant called Big Pommes, and there's a picture of it up on the screen now. And it was just, we all kind of thought it was funny, but we were all sort of divided into various groups. We weren't like all together because there were maybe 40 or so people, and we were in like groups of 3 or 4. But it sort of, as we convened throughout our trip, we found out that at various points, everyone had sort of stopped there to eat at one point or another, and we just thought it was a funny place, especially with the name. So, in in regard to that, I thought I would pay homage to that, and it sort of became a meme among our group. So we are recreating Big Pommes here, and I'll do like a side by side photo at the end too, so you can see it. Um, and and if you're wondering what Big Pommes means, well, pommes is short for like pommes frites, I believe. I don't remember the exact word, but basically French fries. So we put a little French fry stand in the middle building there. Um, and you'll see, I think it turns out pretty well for the limitations of Roller Coaster Tycoon. Um, Anyhow, here you can see me putting in the pathways and the food stand eventually. Oh, but first I put borders on either side since that stand is out in the open. And then I just made some adjustments eventually. Okay, here I'm just putting all of those stands properties together. Um, Nothing too crazy. And then along here, just because we had to get rid of that back wall, I'm going to color that white. And then I just put a little fake wall in behind those other 2 buildings that aren't being used. and then putting a ceiling in here. And nothing too crazy about this. And one thing you may have noticed is a sort of a popular theme in this area is having like tall buildings and sort of big facades, but the functional area of the building itself is within, like, those 2 stories are not functional. That's something I may change in the end, since I believe these were like apartments in the real building, and I think that door on the left there is how people would have accessed them. So I may make this into like an office building as well, and add some extra floors. But for the function of it and for the practicality of it, I should say, within my own gameplay, I left those empty just so I can access the restaurant stand later if I need to with more ease. And you'll see in a moment too, I think after I place some things in here, the ceiling tile right above the restaurant stand, I end up elevating it a couple thirds, um, just in order to access the stall better. And then I'll extend that ceiling, those walls too, I should say. So nothing too crazy with that. And that basically, okay, we're just going to put a sign in here, but we're basically done with the episode. I also have a question for you when this footage is done rolling, but I'm going to wait just a moment. Fun, fun. I guess I spoke a little too quickly because we're putting lighting in now. But the footage, I swear, I can see on my little thing here, it's almost done rolling. Okay, here you can see the area behind the castle. Um, this is just a still photo at this point. But you can see I've highlighted sort of 2 different areas. So I want to extend this area to be like maybe a Black Forest themed section of the park or something along those lines. But in the area highlighted by the tan tiles, I want to do a roller coaster. And I'm including a poll in the community tab on my channel. And I want to know what type of roller coaster I should build here. Right now, the 2 ideas I have are either like a suspended coaster, like a classic suspended coaster, or a bobsleigh coaster. And I think both could work really nicely, but I want to hear your opinions and I want your feedback. So if you go to that poll, definitely vote in it, and I will try and build whatever you guys vote for. And yeah, other than that, here is some footage of Big Pommes, our version and the real version, for comparison. And other than that, have a great day, and I will see you guys in the next episode. Goodbye.